Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Church of the Good Shepherd on Zoom, on YouTube, for the fifth week of our series that we're calling Your Faith, Your Life. Tonight, we are talking very specifically about the Episcopal Church and how it fits into the Anglican Communion. For tonight, we read Jennifer Gamber's book through page 118, which is the chapter Navigating the Church from Local to Worldwide. And so we'll unpack that a little bit. But the first thing,
Hello,
oh, yes, hello? What? Oh, I heard somebody say something.
I
Um,
was lost. I can't hear you.
oh, you can't hear me? Can everyone else hear me? Yeah, everyone else can hear me.
Yep.
Okay. All right, we're going to trust that Judith can figure this out. And in the meantime, I'm going to call us to prayer. So the Lord be with you. Let us pray. Almighty God, you sent your Son, Jesus Christ, to reconcile the world to yourself. We praise and bless you for those whom you have sent in the power of the Spirit to preach the gospel to all nations.
Okay. What happened to audio?
We thank you that in all parts of the earth, the community of love has been gathered together by their prayers and labors,
It is.
and that in every place your servants call upon your name, for the kingdom and the power and the glory are yours forever.
Still can't hear.
Amen. Hey, Judith.
Can't hear you. I'm going to log out and try coming back in.
Okay. We will go on.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I'm going to log out and come back in. Okay.
Okay.
Assuming
I sent her a text and told her
get
that
this
we
to
can
work.
hear her.
There we go.
That's all right. We will continue, and I'm sure Judith will join us again. So the screen that I was sharing, let's see, this is all about our upcoming diocesan convention. And our diocesan convention will take place October 25th to 26th at the Greater Tacoma Convention Center. And this convention happens every year in some place in the diocese. We send elected delegates from all our congregations. Dulcia was one recently, to make decisions that affect all the churches in the Diocese of Olympia. There are about 100 congregations in our diocese, which covers all of Western Washington. Now, for a lot of folks who come into the Episcopal Church fresh, diocesan convention might become an entree into the workings of the larger church. It's for some folks a first indication of how people do the Episcopal thing in different ways and in different places. And it's something we can never learn everything about, all the different aspects of the church. When I was choosing which seminary to attend, I narrowed it down to two choices: the Church Divinity School of the Pacific, which is in the Bay Area, or the Virginia Theological Seminary, which is right outside of DC. If I'd gone to CDSP on the West Coast, I think I would have experienced a lot of the Episcopal Church that I already knew. Specifically the West Coast liberal version that's awfully comfortable to me. Instead, I chose VTS, in part because they had the best financial aid by far, but also because I wanted to see a wider, deeper swath of what the Episcopal Church is.
Hmm.
I became friends with a lot of Southerners there, which was a new experience for me. And I also met a lot of Anglicans from other countries who had come to VTS to study as well. Well, Jennifer Gamber's chapter does a great job laying out the finer points of the Episcopal Church as a whole, and also the entire Anglican Communion and how the Episcopal Church fits into it. But since this is largely a newcomer class, I decided I'd like to take the time this week to talk more about Good Shepherd specifically, and maybe a little bit about how we are like other congregations and how we are different from other congregations in my own experience. So first of all, just to start with our diocese as a whole, we just elected a new bishop and consecrated a new bishop. The Right Reverend Phil LaBelle was consecrated just a few weeks ago. So he's at the very beginning of getting to know us. I think he knows me by name, but I need to make some time with him. Bishop Phil, by the way, has just asked the Reverend Christy Chapman to serve as our next Canon to the Ordinary. And yes, that's a title, Canon to the Ordinary. Now that's canon with one N for those of you who might need to use this word someday. And canon just means specifically a diocesan designated office that is appointed by the bishop. So we have other canons, like Charles Thorne is a layperson, but he's our canon for finance because he's appointed by the bishop to a diocesan position. You don't have to be a clergy person to be a canon. My friend Kathy Hamilton was once the canon for youth ministries, for instance, in the diocese. So Christy Chapman will be the canon to the ordinary. And in this case, the ordinary means the bishop. Long story, I know the ordinary makes it sound boring, but actually canon to the ordinary just means the bishop's right-hand person at the bishop's office. Christy will be in charge of a number of things that happen at the diocesan level, including the process by which we find and call people to become clergy, and the process of deployment, that is finding clergy to fit into all the different congregations and where they're all coming from and working with the congregations on those processes. Another little bit of trivia, remember that the bishop's office is not simply the diocese. Sometimes people say that as a shorthand. Oh, we need to send our assessment to the diocese. No, we are the diocese. We are all the diocese. The diocese is made up of every single expression of the Episcopal Church in Western Washington. So the office of the bishop is the more specific term when you're just talking about the place on Capitol Hill in Seattle where the bishop's office is. Incidentally, that's 3 doors down from St. Mark's Cathedral. And while St. Mark's Cathedral is technically the seat of the bishop, he will rarely be there because the bishop will be traveling from one congregation to another, to another, to another, pretty much all the time, and also participating in the councils of the church on a larger scale as a local bishop from here, participating in other bodies. Now, likewise, the Episcopal Church, yeah, Dilcia, sure.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm very bad with names.
All right.
And the name Christy
Chapman.
Chapman
Yeah, Christy Chapman.
sounds familiar.
Uh-huh. She has served as a supply priest for us a couple of times in the past.
Okay.
Yeah. And for a while, she served as the priest in charge of the mission to seafarers in our diocese. So yeah, you might have run into her before.
I'm sorry, what's that last thing? To seek bearers?
Seafarers,
Oh,
sailors.
seafarers. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
we have a specific mission to seafarers. So when sailors come into port, we have a chaplain who tends to their needs. And that's a mission that is a diocesan mission that we all help fund.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So lots of little bits like that of trivia about our diocese and all the ministries in it. But the other thing I want to say is that likewise, the Episcopal Church as a whole, don't settle for calling it the national church. Because if you were paying attention in Jennifer Gamber's book, much of the Episcopal Church is outside the United States, including our most populous diocese. Did anyone notice? Did you catch that trivia point? Which of our dioceses has the most people in it? Oh, Dilcia, you're on mute. But
Haiti.
Haiti, that's exactly right. The Diocese of Haiti.
And I have a question, not about Haiti, but I see they didn't have Panama, Costa Rica, El Salvador, and none of those other countries in that, in those that said Central America and Caribbean. So
That's because they have their own autonomous churches that are not part of the Episcopal Church, but are part of the Anglican Communion. So I can't speak to Panama or Costa Rica, but El Salvador, where I've visited before, they have the Episcopal Church of El Salvador, which is its own self-sustaining thing.
Okay.
So they're not part of our general convention. Bishop Michael Curry is not their presiding bishop, and so on and so forth.
That's kind of sad. We used to get priests from way before from here, from the United States that will go and serve as priests and even bishop of our churches. So I don't know what happened.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Um,
that might still happen. They've never actually been part of the Episcopal Church proper, but they are Anglicans who have their own church and are part of the Anglican Communion, in the same way that the African churches or the South American churches or whatever, or the Church of England, right, are their own self-sustaining branches of the Anglican Communion. But Haiti is part of the Episcopal Church.
Church.
So is the
Okay.
Dominican Republic, where I spent a few weeks. And so it's kind of a funny division. There's even a diocese of the Episcopal Church that is the convocation of Episcopal churches in Western Europe. So not an Anglican church in France, for instance, but Episcopal churches from here in France. It's kind of complicated. And
Okay.
I don't know all the ins and outs of how that came. But
Okay.
our diocese actually has a companion relationship with the Diocese of El Salvador and longtime friendships there. Yeah, yeah. So that's a lot about the diocese and about the Episcopal Church in general. Before I go on to talk about Good Shepherd, I wonder if anyone has any specific questions, other questions about our diocese or about the Episcopal Church or the Anglican Communion. Okay, if not, I'll go on. Yeah.
We do the same things, the same service, this use the same books. Everything is the same.
You grew up in Panama, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Were you using the Book of Common Prayer that we use here?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah. Actually, come to think of it, they were using that one also in El Salvador. And I think partly that's about availability of materials.
Yeah.
When I was in El Salvador, wait, actually, I don't remember about El Salvador. In the DR, we used the BCP that we use because that is part of the Episcopal Church.
Mhm.
But for a long time, there was not a good independently standing Spanish translation of the Book of Common Prayer, right?
Yeah. No,
And you might
no,
notice-
no, we do have it, and we did use it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so that's why it's
Yeah.
strange, but
Well,
there's some ties there that they keep in touch, I guess.
yeah, absolutely. The issue with my understanding, I mean, and you're a native Spanish speaker, so you can tell me, and you grew up with a Spanish language prayer book. The issue was that the Spanish translation we used for years was very literal, word for word, one to one, as much as possible, without taking into account much about culture in local places. And so that was often seen as oh, this could have been better done. There is a newer Spanish translation and also a newer French translation, and I understand that those are much better.
Better.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway. Okay. So I want to talk about Good Shepherd a little bit, and specifically just look at a few of the areas that make a church distinctive, that make a congregation distinctive from other congregations, and how Good Shepherd might fit into that. So one really obvious one would be to talk about the size of a congregation, right? There are a couple of congregations in the Episcopal Church with tens of thousands of members, but the vast majority of Episcopal churches have fewer than 100 members, the vast majority. So currently the digital sign outside of Good Shepherd that I love to program on the computer from inside the building says, medium-sized churches are cozy and lively. Come and see. And I think that does kind of speak to who we are. While in some ways we might seem to you like a small place, especially if you've belonged to larger churches in the past, we really are firmly in the medium-sized camp. Not everybody knows everybody else. All right, I've certainly grown up. I grew up in churches where literally everybody knew everybody else. We always have some program or class or something going on. There's a lot of activity. And the structure of our many ministries is really quite complex, with different ministry leaders organizing and wrangling folks to carry out all the ministries of the church. And the systems that we've set up for such things, I know I've worked really hard on making those systems be not about specific people, but about specific roles, so that we can always be training who the next person is and the next person, and so that they can step into well-defined roles as much as possible, for easy transfer of knowledge, right? So that people can fill in for a time and then hand on to someone else. And one of the things that's aiding us in this work is our new Realm app, which you can join if you haven't already done so. I'll never stop talking about how wonderful it is. That's the link right there. We are still learning it, and it's not yet fully functional, but we're getting there. So in short, an awful lot happens at Good Shepherd despite what may seem like our small size, and it doesn't all depend on the priest. In a smaller congregation, a lot more might depend on the priest actually doing it, or at least approving it. I'm really interested in expanding the reality of Good Shepherd doing things that I don't even necessarily need to know about. It makes for a livelier church. Committees that I don't have to go to the meetings of, right? Because I'm busy enough. So the hope here is that more and more of our members will understand themselves to be the church and not just to go to church. That's an important distinction that I'm always trying to teach. Any questions about church size and how that relates to Good Shepherd?
What's our total congregation number?
Pardon?
How many people are actually members?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's sometimes a tricky question to nail down, but I think roughly 125. That's about right. I guess if you want to be strictly technical, it might be as few as 100, but it just kind of depends on how you count them. And I'd say there are maybe 175 to 200 kind of in our larger universe of people. So it's concentric circles, right? And it depends on exactly how you measure. Yeah.
Does the size of the vestry depend on the size of the church?
Yes, it can. It can. In the past, Good Shepherd has had a 12-member vestry. At some point, that did shrink to 9 because they found that it was not possible to recruit that many people every year. And honestly, sometimes we have a hard time finding 9. That hasn't been a problem as much lately, but yeah, that can fluctuate from one congregation to another. The size of the vestry, though, is written into our bylaws. And so if we want to change the size of the vestry, first we have to change the bylaws. Yeah.
Get it approved as a diocesan level?
No, I think that kind of thing we could change just as a congregation, the number of vestry members. But there's a constitution and canons for the entire Episcopal Church, for the Diocese of Olympia, and for the Church of the Good Shepherd. And our constitution and canons always has to match and be in line with those larger ones, not contradictory to. So there are the things that we determine on a local level. And incidentally, I think I've got the bylaws, the Constitution and canons in Realm under resources. If I haven't, I need to remember to put those there for everybody to see. Yeah. Okay. I will go on. How about worship and music? When I was called to Good Shepherd, one of the things that they said that they were happy about is that I'm a priest who's also a musician. Because one of the things I was told by the call committee is we want to figure out what exactly is Good Shepherd's musical tradition. What's the range of it? What are the boundaries of it? How do we define it? Because there is so much music out there, and there was apparently some stress within the congregation about what our musical tradition should or should not include. So I thought, all right, let's get to work on that. And other issues have consumed more of our time. But I think what you'll find if Good Shepherd is your first Episcopal church is that we're a pretty good representative sample. Like all Episcopal congregations, of course, our worship comes from the 1979 Book of Common Prayer and also from other approved liturgies that have come into existence since 1979, or as some people still call it, the New Prayer Book. And here's the New Hymnal, 1982. I do remember a time when we were still using the 1940 hymnal, and that's the first one I became aware of as a little child. At Good Shepherd, we primarily use hymns from the 1982 hymnal, but also hymns from other sources produced since then. There's a book called Wonder, Love, and Praise, and there's one called Gather, and there's one called Lift Every Voice and Sing, which is specifically an African-American hymnal. So we use all of these sources, and honestly, these days, the way we do that is that we go to a website we subscribe to and we download the graphics and put them into the bulletin, rather than people needing to pull out a hymnal, but we do always have those hymnals as a backup. Even within just these resources, there's a huge variety of options. And Alan, having come from a Roman Catholic cathedral, also brings a lot of things from his background into our congregation. Now, about 20 to 25 years ago, let me ask, Dilcia, when did you come to Good Shepherd? Yeah, hang on, you're on mute. There we go.
2009.
2009. Okay.
The ending of 2009.
Okay, so I'm really talking about a time before that, I think, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. We could have described Good Shepherd as more of a charismatic congregation, I think. We had a praise band with guitars and drums, and that's when a large screen was installed in the space so that people could sing along with lyrics projected overhead. Was that still happening when you came, Dilcia?
Yes.
It was.
We didn't have the praise band all the time, but they will come from time to time. And I
Sure.
like that. I know some people didn't like it. They say it was too noisy and blah, 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 blah. But younger, and I enjoy praise music.
Mhm.
And younger people gravitate to that type of music. So I'm just speaking like Chinyere saying, oh, they don't sing all these other things that, so is it something to think about?
Yeah.
We
Well,
have to able to reach out to everybody,
right.
not all praise thing, because I love my hymns from the hymnal. But they have some out there that are really good and really inspiring.
Sure. Yeah, I'm all in favor of variety. Part of it is about who is the talent base in our congregation. And we don't have a praise band in our congregation. We don't have the people who can play those instruments at this point, right?
And,
So
and that's okay.
Yeah, so there's that limitation. I like drums. I like sometimes I'll pull out that djembe and just start banging on it if it's an especially happy celebration. So yeah, I mean, I think that my observation is that more and more younger people aren't as into the praise band music, but are into very ancient music. And it just kind of depends. There's more variety out there of tastes. So what you'll find, though, is that some folks at Good Shepherd really do love that style of music and are never more in the zone than when they're waving their hands in the air while they sing. And you can see a remnant of this in the way that we sing the Lord's Prayer at the 10:30.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, so it's a musical setting that was written specifically for Good Shepherd way back when. And when I arrived in 2018, the tradition was that when the Lord's Prayer began to be sung, everyone in the congregation would move close to one another and hold hands while they sang. And then at a certain point midway through, all the linked hands would rise into the air together. I have to say, standing from the altar and looking out on this phenomenon, I have to say it was truly touching. I loved it. But for newcomers, honestly, absolutely terrifying for some people. And there were people who saw that happen and turned around and never came back. It looked to them like a sudden departure from what we'd been doing for the whole service and seemed to demand that they become intimately familiar with all these people they'd never met before. I had a hard time expressing the downside of this tradition to the congregation, right? How do you do this wonderful, joyful thing while still extending hospitality to those who have no clue what's going on? And then COVID happened. And when we returned to the buildings in 2021, we were certainly not holding hands. So that practice ended. And honestly, I breathed a huge sigh of relief for the sake of the new people. But to this day, many people do choose to raise their hands while they sing the Lord's Prayer. And I still think it's lovely. You can also see some of our local liturgical leanings in the ways that the service typically ends. Again, this is something that might make you wonder what's going on if you're a newcomer, but in the dismissal at the end of the book of the service, in the Book of Common Prayer, we are specifically instructed that during Easter season, we conclude with 2 alleluias, right? Thanks be to God, alleluia, alleluia. But that's only 8 Sundays out of the year. And otherwise, no alleluias are indicated there. So, as a priest bound to conform to the worship, doctrine, and discipline of the Episcopal Church, and I did make a vow, I don't say the alleluias on any but those 8 Sundays. However, the congregation sure does. And usually 3 hallelujahs, not 2. And sometimes someone will also shout, yes. So it's not a bad thing. But also notice that when Lent begins, the congregation knows perfectly well that we never use hallelujahs in Lent in any form, and they will just stop. So consider yourself warned. Don't be the only one on the first Sunday of Lent saying, hallelujah. So all of this said, Alan, I really depend on Alan as our director of music to draw out the talents of those in our congregation and put them to use. And I'm so glad to see the choir slowly working its way back to reality, nearly the size it was when COVID began. Dilcia, really glad to see you singing. So if anyone's interested in joining the choir, just feel free to show up at 9:30 for a rehearsal, and Alan will put you to work. Any other questions about worship and music?
Why don't you say hallelujah more than 8 times?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it has to do with a sort of Anglican understanding of really, really appreciating the alleluias when they come, and then being able to put them away and save them. But again, sometimes we do use alleluias at other points in the service outside of Easter season. I don't know why at the General Convention, when they were passing this prayer book, someone in all their wisdom had decided that in that place in the service, we only use alleluias during Easter. We do use alleluias at other times, like Alleluia, Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us. That's all the time except during Lent. So, Barbara, I've got to say, I don't know the answer specifically in that place. I only know that I'm supposed to follow the rubrics in the book, so I try.
And that's all good. I think it's all good. But, worshiping, yes, respect, honoring the higher power, if I will say so, is wonderful. But pouring your heart out with joy is also important. So, yeah, I do agree with Lent. That we all agree with, is a more meditative time and things like that. So, I don't know. I find it restrictive. I know you have to follow the rules because we all have to agree.
I took vows.
Yeah, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't.
I'll never squelch other people's alleluias.
Right, and I won't do that either. I will support it.
Yeah.
I am one of the ones that said, hallelujah. I didn't know it was supposed to be 2.
It's 2 in the prayer book.
Yeah.
During Easter. Yeah.
Thought it was always 3. Never mind. I missed that one. Right, yeah.
It just seems weird that you don't say it like during Lent, because isn't that like the most joyous season of the church year? Isn't that kind of what Jesus is all about, is dying for our sins? And so it
Right.
seems odd to me. Like the one time you really should be praising God, like, nope, not going to give him that word today. Nope, you got to wait 8 more weeks.
But Barbara, we save it for Easter. And that's the joyful time, right? Lent is the solemn time of preparation for Easter. And that's the season when people will maybe, for instance, give something up as a practice and notice the lack of it, right? So, and that's one of the things we give up is the alleluias during Lent. So yeah, it's the way we talk about it with kids in the Godly Play classroom. I love this, that Christmas and Easter are such deep, deep mysteries that we need whole seasons to get ready for them. And we use the season of Advent to get ready for the season of Christmas. And Christmas lasts for 12 days. And Advent is 4 Sundays, all that time prior. But Easter is an even deeper mystery than Christmas, we say. So we need 6 whole Sundays to prepare, and that's Lent, 40 days. And then Easter is such a great mystery, it can't be contained in one day. It goes on for 50 days, all the way to Pentecost. And I love the church calendar and the way that we walk through that and the way that our practices change with the seasons. So Lent is indeed the very quiet time, the solemn time. Very often I'll have Alan not play a prelude at all during Lent so that we're all beginning worship in total silence. Just trying to quiet things down. Yeah. And then when Easter comes, all the joy comes bursting out everywhere. And I love that transition. Barbara, come to the Easter Vigil, the great vigil of Easter on the Saturday night. That's where it's at for the Easter service. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I won't commit to that, but I'll certainly,
Okay. Well,
I'll certainly consider that.
okay. So I'll talk a little more now about inclusivity and diversity as aspects of our theology. You know, in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 7, verse 8, Jesus criticizes the Pharisees by saying, "You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition." The question is, what is the commandment of God and what is human tradition? Anyone could use this verse to clobber people they disagree with, right? Well, that's a commandment of God, not human tradition. I think it's instructive to note what Jesus says next. He expands on his criticism by noting that some Pharisees use the letter of the law to make life as comfortable for themselves as possible while victimizing other people, even their own family members. That's what he's griping about. Well, currently, Episcopalians are reassessing our own church's role in the perpetuation of American racism. As a colonial offshoot of the Church of England, we can't deny the power dynamics that have sustained systemic racism to this day. We are actively involved as a church in learning our own history and striving to overcome the conflation of white dominance with normative Episcopal traditions. So I think we should expect and welcome everyone who becomes an Episcopalian to challenge and change us as we listen for God's voice together and become more multiculturally competent. So for this, you can check out in particular our upcoming series, Sacred Ground, the next formation series that will start. That'll be on it'll start on November 14th. And this group is specifically going to learn about the history of American racism and the church's role in it. Because it's very intense subject matter, this group doesn't meet every week. It meets about every 3 weeks with lots and lots of reading assignments and videos to watch, lots of homework in between, because it can be some very intense learning. I recommend it. I've been through it a couple of times. And this year, Mary Aronin and Anna Lynn are going to co-facilitate it. So that'll start on Thursday night, November 14th. I believe it's going to be on Zoom, and it'll go all the way through May because it's only going to meet about every 3 weeks. But it's a really great way to bond with a group as well and to do some tough work together. So stay tuned for more about that. Here again, I think the Episcopal Church is pretty representative of the Episcopal Church in general, and in particular Episcopal congregations in our diocese. The Pacific Northwest is in some places very, very white, and in some places very, very diverse. Federal Way is one of the most diverse cities in our state and in the nation, frankly. But Episcopal churches have tended to be pretty white, largely because of our coming from the Church of England. But colonialism has caused there to be Anglican churches all over the world. And Dulcia, you talked about your experience growing up in Panama. I think about our friends, the Akparantas and the Onyanejos growing up in Nigeria, where Anglicanism is very firmly established. Our friend Mary Otieno, who's been with us at this class, who comes from Kenya, where the Anglican Church is very well established. So we see a lot of diversity as possible. And there are also historically Black African-American Episcopal churches in various places in the United States. Not so much here. The one I can think of is St. Clement's in Seattle, but that one has shrunk an awful lot in the last couple of decades. So depending on where you go, you'll see a variety of different folks, or you won't see much variety. Another piece about diversity in the Episcopal Church has to do with representation. And in the past half century, the Episcopal Church has really gained a progressive reputation. We began ordaining women to the priesthood 50 years ago, 1974. We were by no means the first Protestant denomination to do so. The American Baptists were doing it before we were, by the way. But now we no longer uphold any assumptions about specific roles for men and women in the church. And we recognize the existence and the God-belovedness of non-binary and transgender people. And we are coming to understand that often it's just more helpful to learn a person's pronouns than to assume that we can guess what their gender is or what they would say their gender is. So this is both a theological and a cultural phenomenon. A majority of American Christians is now okay with same-sex marriage and believes that LGBTQ plus people should be allowed at all levels of leadership. That's a majority now of Christians, by the way. Even in so-called conservative evangelical churches that do not allow the practice, more and more of their members are saying that should change. And this comes from knowing and understanding people personally, right? Not from necessarily doing our theological homework, though we have, but from recognizing that divine love can bloom in many places outside that traditional norm of cisgender heterosexuality. And the Episcopal Church has long been a leader in this conviction. I'm 51 years old and I've been an Episcopalian all my life. And I do not remember a time when my local church was not on some level welcoming gay people, even in small towns in Idaho and Michigan. Some of that probably had to do with my dad being the priest. But it wasn't until I moved to Kent that I discovered a congregation that at the time, 30 years ago, was not welcoming LGBTQ people, and I left. I couldn't stay there. And that's when I wound up at St. Mark's Cathedral that was performing same-sex marriages before it was even allowed by the church. So that's another whole story. So at Good Shepherd and in most places, in the wider Episcopal Church, we fully affirm the inclusion of LGBTQ plus people in the life of the church. And it means more than we won't turn you away. It means you are a child of God. It means no one will be excluded from the church's worship and sacraments on the basis of their sexual orientation or gender identity, nor can these be barriers to leadership roles. At Good Shepherd, you're just welcome as you are. And we don't arrive at these convictions by ignoring what's in the Bible. I'm well aware of those clobber passages that people like to drag out. But we get there by actively engaging with the Bible. And we believe that Christianity transcends a lot of cultural assumptions, some of which are embedded in the Bible. We can return here to that model of the three-legged stool. For centuries, Episcopalians have held scripture alongside tradition and human reason and experience and balancing all of these to figure out where the Holy Spirit is speaking to us today. It's not a matter of bowing to culture, but of acknowledging that the Spirit is moving and acting in the whole world and not just in the church. Sometimes the Holy Spirit gets out ahead of the church. Sometimes we have to run to catch up, and we have to apologize when we get there. I've also found that there are really kind of two Christianities emerging now. And these are not cleanly bisected by denomination necessarily, but that there are Christians who believe LGBTQ folks should be welcomed and included and joyfully celebrated, and those who believe that they should be squelched or excluded or changed. And you'll find people of both kinds even within the same church, even within the same denomination. But I've noticed that that's a pretty accurate bellwether for a church, right? For lots of other things about that church. But like for instance, if you go on a church website and you see that it says that we believe that the Bible is inerrant in all things, they probably don't welcome LGBTQ people either, and vice versa, right? So it's kind of a bellwether. And I urge people to look for those things when they're looking for a church, so that they can find a church that actually does align with their values and that they can be on board with the mission of, and where their friends and loved ones could actually attend, you know. So any questions about any of that?
No question, but
There-
just an opinion that it seems pretty arrogant to assume that LGBTQ plus people are not to be included, since we're all created in God's image.
Yeah, and I think
And
that,
Jesus says, love one another. It just seems pretty darn arrogant to say, well, I know best and I don't know. I guess I'm not a very,
Jesus was wrong. Yeah, no, I don't get that either.
yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I get it, but it has to do with an interpretation of the Bible that I don't share, right?
I've always told people, isn't there a line in the Bible about something about stick with your own kind? And what is more stick with your own kind than a man with a man and a woman with a woman? I mean, if you really want to
you
get down
spoke
to
too
it.
fast, Barbara. I couldn't understand what you said.
So there's something about stick with your own kind, right?
Oh.
Like don't lay down, a man doesn't lay down with the animal or something. I can't remember the exact thing, but I've always said if that's there, then what's more stick with your own kind than a man with a man and a woman with a woman? I mean,
That's
I
funny.
kind of get over yourself and
Yeah.
love one another, but
Yeah. Dilcia,
Well,
my
yeah, I think this subject is very, how could I say, interesting, delicate, lot of little fine lines.
Mhm.
And I don't know if we'll ever know 100% what is what. Yes, we are all God's creatures. We're all, He loved us regardless of what we decide to do or not to do.
Mhm.
But we have to make sure that when we are making, I want to use the word concessions, that we understand that because we love doesn't mean condone or accept. And I'm not deciding one thing is wrong or the other because I cannot make that decision.
Right.
The only person that can do that is God.
Mhm.
And wherever. Our part is to love, to show love, to embrace each other and support each other.
Mhm.
But is this right or this wrong? That's why extremes are never the answer to things.
Mhm.
You know, all in or all out
Mhm.
is somewhere in between.
Yeah.
And there are things that it's okay and things that are not okay. I'm going to be frank, you know, I don't agree with marriage. That's me.
Mhm.
They can be together, they can think, because there's nothing that I can say, no, this is thing. I can't say that it's wrong, but marriage to me is something a little bit more profound. But that's me,
Hmm.
you know,
Hmm.
something has to do with man and a woman. Marriage in the sense of priests and all this other thing,
Mhm.
you know. I said, well, they can get married at the town hall or wherever it is, sign the papers and so forth. I don't know, but this is Dilcia.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you see, we have diversity of opinion right here. And I can only speak from my own experience for all the deeply beloved gay people in my life who have married each other and whose marriages are life-giving, windows into God's love. And I see that loud and clear.
Yes, and I don't doubt that.
Yeah.
I have gay friends too, and thing, but did that, how could it, sacrament
Mhm.
then?
Yeah. Sacrament.
And that's me. I may be wrong, but
Yeah.
I don't condone and I don't say, oh my God, what horrible things. I don't, because I have no idea
Yeah.
of what.
Right.
God knows all these things and He created us and He knew all these things were going to be there.
Yep.
But we just need to, you know, there's always a line. That is the line I don't cross.
And you don't have to, right? Yeah. So I mean, that's one of the markers I use is who is being hurt and who is being raised up and loved, right? And if we're talking about people being raised up and loved, I'm all for it. Yeah. So okay, so all of this is to say that the Episcopal Church has been officially on board with same-sex marriage since 2015, right about the exact moment when the Supreme Court ruled that it was okay. So it just happened to be like the same month when that happened. So another area we could look at is community engagement and mission. And of course, lots of churches do things in lots of different ways. As you walk into our building, you'll see a sign hanging overhead that says, "Welcome to Good Shepherd, a Jubilee Ministry Center." And this, some people go, well, what is that? Or it's been there so long. For some people, I think it's like wallpaper, but this is a designation that we earned through the sheer number of ministries that we have maintained for those in need in our community. Now, some of these, like we used to have an every night women's shelter half the year. That's one that fell by the wayside during the pandemic. But other things like the Saturday community meal have continued without a break. And in the past, Good Shepherd has been known as the little church with the big heart. And that's on our sweatshirts. I still have an old sweatshirt with that. It's charming, but I have been shying away from this phrase lately because I don't think that the word little serves us very well in this case. We are truly medium-sized. And a lot of people, when they hear little church, they're like, oh, I don't want to be part of a little church. No, that's, yeah. So, but I do like the phrase. I think it's very, very charming. So any wonderings or questions about mission, community engagement and mission?
We don't have the AA anymore.
We do.
don't
We
have-
have two
Oh.
AA groups, Thursday night and Saturday morning, two men's groups that meet there. Yeah, and the Federal Way Community Caregiving Network is there on Tuesday mornings from 10 to noon, giving out rental assistance and gas vouchers and so on. Pre-pandemic, we had a breakfast ministry where people would serve breakfast to those who were coming for that assistance, and it was twice a week. But due to availability of volunteers, it's only come back to the level that it has. Yeah. Okay. Lots of ways to get involved. Our outreach committee, under the able leadership of Amy Drake, is the group that decides what efforts we will engage in. More recently, refugee resettlement, and also the foster family that we've adopted through the organization, the Seattle Angels, and our long-standing partnership with Lake Grove Elementary School. If you were here yesterday, you saw Tracy Manilides stand up and say, hey, we're doing a crayon and Kleenex drive. So start buying crayons and Kleenex for Lake Grove. And then at Thanksgiving, we will give gift cards that the school can distribute to families that might need a little help to get some groceries from the grocery outlet for Thanksgiving dinner. So, location and demographics. We talked a little about this, but here's a little piece of trivia. Since I arrived at Good Shepherd, the average age of our members, can you guess what it was when I got here? And can you guess what it is now? Any guesses?
Younger when you got here and older now.
Yes, that is true. Any guesses?
30 and 50.
Oh, wow. That would be a stark difference. No, it's not that wide a range. When I got here, the average age was 59, and now it's 65. And I think the pandemic had a lot to do with that, just with the difficulty that we've had in meeting people. We're coming out of that now, and we know we need to meet people in the neighborhood. I do find the statistic concerning, and many others do too. But there are also really big cultural forces at work here that are very difficult to rise above. And Federal Way is an odd city. There's not really a downtown, and I find that so strange. The mall is not a place people really hang out much. And so it's hard to know where people go to hang out. I was talking to a teenager the other day and I asked her, okay, there's no downtown in Federal Way. Where do you and your friends go to hang out? And she said South Center Mall. So they go to Tacoma. If I want to evangelize, I should be there with a collar at South Center Mall. Actually, I tried that once and I had a little sign out that said the priest is in, ask me questions, and they kicked me out. They said I couldn't be there. So anyway, even so, compared to lots of other churches, we have really hung in there the past few years and we have not really shrunk. That feels like growth in the current situation that we're in, coming out of the pandemic and in the Pacific Northwest, which is often known by statisticians as the none zone. Not nuns like Catholic nuns, but N-O-N-E, like what's your religion? None. right? It can be very hard to be heard through all the noise when we're just a humble, medium-sized church doing our thing, and we've got Casey Treat down the street, right? When people think of Christians, they think of the Christian Faith Center or something like that. They don't tend to think of us, but here we are doing our thing. And then on the topic of leadership and governance of the congregation, just some basics. I'm the rector, that's my title. And the rector is, I forget if Jennifer Gamber went into this. Rector is the title for a priest in charge of a self-sustaining congregation.
Yes.
Yes, where we pay all our own bills, right? And if we were a mission, meaning that we would need a financial assistance from the whole diocese to be sustained, my title would be vicar instead of rector. And that's what they are at St. Columba's in Kent. They have a vicar instead of a rector. I am Good Shepherd's only full-time employee. And I don't know when the last time was Good Shepherd had more than one. Dulcia, do you know? Has there ever been more than one full-time employee in your time here? Oh, you just went on mute.
Oh, I did it backwards. The
Yeah.
secretary, not the one when you came, but before that.
Oh, Pam?
I can't remember her name now.
Yeah.
This was a while back.
But there used to
Yeah.
be full-time.
She
Yeah.
she was full-time.
Right. So based on our current budget situation, what we can manage right now is that Alan, our musician, is half-time, 20 hours a week. And Evan Hirschman, our parish administrator, is 15 hours a week. So he only works in the mornings and only Tuesday through Friday. Robbie, our bookkeeper, is only 5 hours per week. And then Eric, our sexton, who that means he takes care of the place, he cleans up and tidies up. He does work 20 hours per week, but his pay is that he lives in the shepherd's hut, which is the little house in our parking lot. And then as far as cantors, choral scholars, other musicians, Alan pays them from his budget. So that's, and then Anna, as our deacon, her position is not paid, although we actually are going to pay her $25 a month because that is a new diocesan policy. It sounds insulting, but the reason for $25 a month is that it allows her to be part of the church pension group along with priests like me. And she can then take advantage of workshops that they offer and other opportunities by just being paid that tiny little bit. So we're going to do that. But deacons are not traditionally paid in the church. Any other questions about personnel and staff and governance? The vestry the vestry is my employer, and then I employ all the other people. So that's one way that works. Judith, go ahead.
And the deacon doesn't work for you.
Right, the deacon doesn't work for me. She works for Bishop Phil directly, and it's with Bishop Phil's permission that she gets to serve at Good Shepherd. Right. Yeah. Okay. Another thing that I love to talk about with Good Shepherd is this concept of intergenerationality. And this is something we're still learning how to do, but I do think it's something we do fairly well. When most people hear the word intergenerational, they usually assume that we're talking about making a place for children, and we are. And we're also talking about making a place for elders and busy professionals and empty nesters and parents and singles and young adults and everybody else. We have many and diverse lifestyles in our congregation, and this is the part of the beauty of belonging to a church. So we want to recognize these realities and try to structure our ministries around them, and I think there's a lot more we could do on this. One is the assumption that all generations can learn from each other, and that works both from elder to younger and younger to elder. Also, I certainly maintain, and studies have borne this out, that weekly worship on Sundays is our primary form of learning how to be the church. It's our primary form of faith formation. Sunday worship is not intended to be individual meditation time for adults. It's community time for all ages. And there are times and places to separate out age groups, but Sunday Eucharist is not one of them. Well, this isn't always easy for parents of young children. But that means that it's on all of us to help raise kids in the church and support and reassure their parents from week to week who may be nervous about noisy children. So intergenerational doesn't just mean inclusive of children, but this is often the most crucial need because children grow up very quickly. I've noticed that elders might misplace a year, but children never misplace a week, right? You can go, "Wait, what age am I again?" But kids always know exactly how old they are. It takes intention and effort for elders to respect young people. And that means working to know and understand each individual young person over and over again as they age, and never relying on saying, "I remember when you were only 3." They hate that. It's not respectful, right? It's about meeting them where they are now, learning their name again, remembering they probably don't remember your name, and that's okay, right? A child who grows up with 5 unrelated adults in the church is statistically far more likely to remain in the church. Far more likely. So befriend children. Get to know them by name again and again. So anything else about intergenerationality? I love the friendships I see among generations, not just with children, but I enjoy, Gen Z and boomers, for instance, and just all the different ways that people interact. And I have to say, my child, Sarah, Mary Aaron knows who Sarah is and reaches out to her even when she's at college and just texts and says, "Hey, how are you doing?" Right? This is the sort of thing that's really, really important. Yeah. Okay. Anything else on that? All right. Well, the last thing I want to talk about is membership. And Barbara and I were just talking about this today, about what it means to be a member of Good Shepherd. And at Good Shepherd, membership simply means that you've shared with us the details of your baptism in any Christian church. That's it. If you're not baptized, you're not a member, but that doesn't make you any less important. That's important to know because people have to find the church somehow, right? But membership is about baptism. And when we have the information that you know about your baptism on file, even if it's as little as, "I know I was baptized," check, right? The more details you can give, the more you know about your baptism, and that's a good thing. But once we've given us that information and you've said you want to be a member, you're a member. So we also do schedule twice yearly a formal newcomer welcome. The next one will be on December 8th. This rite doesn't mark like a formal change in denomination, but it just indicates that you've decided to be part of this worshiping community, and it's public. You put your face out there in front of everyone so that they can get to know you. Nobody has to do it. We encourage all members to make a financial pledge to the Church of the Good Shepherd, promise to commit a certain amount of money to the church in a given calendar year. So we just started working on 2025. We don't police this practice, we just invite. And committing to any amount at all is a spiritual practice because everything we have comes from God. It's an act of faith, trusting that together we will care for one another's needs. Even our congregation's children, many of them pledge from their allowance as a way of developing that habit of sharing. Karen talked about that on Sunday in her speech. There's no minimum amount. So I'm going to put the link in the, whoops, that's not the whole link. Hang on. There's the link to the online pledge card. So if you haven't pledged yet, you can click on that and do it, or at any point in October, which is when the pledge drive is going on. And then finally, if you've come to us from another Episcopal or from another denomination, another Christian denomination, and decide that you do want to make a formal switch to the Episcopal Church, we have a process for that too. And at Good Shepherd, we call it The Way. It's a group that learns and grows together from January to May each year. And for more information, stick around because it's going to run from January to May. Ashley G is our catechist for that process. She is wonderful, and I highly recommend it for everyone. It's not just for new people, it's for whoever wants to come along. And if you are someone who's been around a while, you can be a sponsor to someone who is coming through that process. Like Judith came to me and said, I want to participate in this process. And I said, well, Judith, the way the numbers are working out and knowing that you're already an Episcopalian, we could really use a sponsor. Will you do that, please? So
I said yes.
yes, exactly. Yeah.
And as it, so I've been an Episcopalian since 76,
Mhm.
not my entire life, but a big chunk of it.
Mhm.
And I learned a whole lot in the way that I didn't know or deepened my knowledge, as well as forming all sorts of really wonderful bonds with the other people that walked the way with me. And then I got to make pilgrimage to St. Mark's and make my public reaffirmation to the bishop.
Right.
That was cool.
Yep, exactly. That's part of the
That was good.
process. And the other thing I want to say about that is that the sort of the backbone of this process called the Way is what we call spiritual autobiographies. We share the stories of our lives through the lens of faith with one another as a way of getting to know each other better. Like I said in my sermon yesterday, let's be friends. That's a good piece of let's be friends right there, is sharing our lives with one another. Yeah. Okay.
That sounds terrifying.
Does it, Barbara? Yeah. You know, it does to a lot of people at first. It is a vulnerable thing. It is a vulnerable thing.
I mean, obviously I don't want to be on camera, in part because I sit in a recliner and my face would like be huge, but it's the whole public thing. Like, I mean, I don't mind going to church or whatever, but I don't want to be on display, I guess. And that makes me uncomfortable. And it's weird because at work, I do that, right? I lead groups, I'm a director, blah, 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 blah.
Mhm.
But I don't know, it just, it makes me very uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well,
It's
and that's
much
why
more intimate.
what's that?
Faith is much more intimate than running a business meeting, because I struggled with that too.
Mhm. Exactly. And that's why we don't make this process required for anyone. You know, nobody has to go through this. But at the same time, there's an awful lot of grace in the group as well. We don't record the sessions ever. And there's just Ashley has an amazing way of like setting this table to make the table on Zoom to make a safe space for people to share their lives with one another. And I found it to be really wonderful, but nobody's required.
And how often do they meet?
Weekly,
And weekly? Oh,
weekly from
okay.
January to May. Yeah. Mhm.
Monday
And
night football.
yeah, right, exactly. Some people come into it going, oh my gosh, that's such a long time. Well, it's 17 weeks. You know, I don't know if it'll be 17 this year. The sabbatical may tweak that reality a little bit. Ashley's working on that. This year, it'll be Ashley working with our sabbatical priest, Carola von Rangel. The two of them will lead it together. And Ashley said, well, maybe we won't start right at the beginning of January. We'll see. I'm just gonna leave it to them to work it out, because I won't be around during that time. Any questions about my sabbatical while we're here? Yeah, Lee.
Where are you going?
Ah, yes, where am I?
Because I was thinking you're staying somewhere around, you're just going to take classes. But Bridget was saying, oh, or was it Ronnie, that you're going to be in the Vatican. I'm going, he's going to the Vatican?
No, I mean, I'd love to see the Vatican someday. I have no plans to go to the Vatican.
Okay.
However, the centerpiece of the sabbatical for me will be 3 weeks in Costa Rica.
Oh, beautiful.
And Christy
Lovely.
gets to join me for 2 of those. She'll be on vacation, and we're going to do some very intentional Spanish learning while we're there.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the second.
And when are those 3 weeks?
Oh, in February. Yeah, I've heard it's the best time of year to go to Costa Rica.
Okay.
Yeah, do you agree?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Probably because it's summer.
Yeah, it's not supposed to be the rainy
Yeah.
season.
Yeah, it's summer time. Yeah.
Yeah.
I will be in Panama during that time.
Yeah. Costa Rica's just one up from Panama, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm excited to go there. I've never been that far south before. The rest of the sabbatical, I'll be around, but I will be 100% unplugged from Good Shepherd. The only people who will be able to talk to me will be Karen as senior warden and Carola as the sabbatical priest. And really basically just like, if somebody dies, tell me so that I can pray for them. But I won't be there to do the funeral. You know, I'm going to be completely unplugged and not coming back until after Easter. And I think that's important. The congregation needs space from the rector from time to time.
So we should try not to die in it.
Try not to die, January to April. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, the last thing I want to say while we're still recording is that I have a little homework for you for next week, as Judith will be leading next week, but I do want to recommend in advance of her presentation a video. And I've just put it in the chat. I will also email it around to all of you. This is a class that I led a year ago on spiritual gifts called The Christian Playbook. This is part 1 of 4 of that series. And I think that it's a good entree into the different ways that we exercise ministry in the church and the different practices that are specifically Christian and how we organize our lives as Christians. So I recommend that to you. It is in the chat if you want to snag that link now, or I'll also email it around after we're done. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording, but we still have 20 minutes that we can continue to ask and share questions and answers. I want to thank those who are joining us later on YouTube for being with us, and we'll see you next time for part 6. Thanks a lot.